Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to another Watchman Newscast Livestream. It is Wednesday, August 16th. It is great to be with you. We're going to around 5 p.m. Eastern Time, I believe, for the better part of the next hour. We've already got a very active chat here, I see, on my laptop. Welcome to everyone from around the world. Before we are done, we will have thousands with us, so it's pretty exciting to always be here with you each week on the Watchman Newscast Livestream. Much to discuss. Man, we've been talking a lot recently about the tensions, and I mean tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border. We've got some stunning, well, maybe not stunning, but very bold comments from Hezbollah leader Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah that I want to share with you. Also, a consolidation of sorts between Iran-backed terror groups in Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland. The world calls it the West Bank. Here on the Watchman, we call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Bible calls it. So we'll stick with that. We want to talk about that as well. And the big one, which is in the title and the thumbnail of today's newscast, is Iran getting close to actually testing a nuclear weapon? It's not alarmism. It's not sensationalism. European intelligence services are saying exactly that. Folks, call me crazy, but as Ron Burgundy once said, that's kind of a big deal. It dropped on Friday, this news, in the Jerusalem Post. They picked it up, they published it, but the mainstream media, I know you're shocked by this, virtually ignored what I believe is a massive story that the European intelligence services, I'm in the U.S., I'm an American, obviously, our Western allies, Israel's Western allies, even though many times the policies of Europe are very anti-Israel, but nonetheless, they are saying that the Iranian regime could be close to testing a nuclear weapon, a huge story which should be broadcast worldwide, and yet it's not. It drops on a Friday, and secondly, it comes at the same time as another Iran-related story we've reported on here. The Biden administration recently struck a deal with Iran. The deal has not completely come to fruition yet, but it is a prisoner release deal where Iran will release 5 U.S. citizens from Iranian custody. And in exchange, the Biden administration will see to it that up to $7 billion in frozen Iranian assets will be released, gift wrapped into the hands of the Iranian regime. And folks, what do you think the mullahs in Tehran will do with all that money? Do you think they'll use it to, I don't know, build schools and playgrounds and community centers in Iran? Or will they use it to funnel to the likes of Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad to destroy schools and playgrounds and community centers in Israel and beyond, by the way? Perhaps they'll give some of it to the Houthis and they'll use it to fire rockets, drones, etc. at Saudi Arabia. The list goes on and on. But that is the state of play with that deal. Now, I don't believe the money is delivered to Iran until those U.S. citizens who have reportedly been released to house arrest now actually set foot back on American soil. We shall see. But nonetheless, that was announced late last week. At the same time, this story dropped in the Jerusalem Post. In a minute, I'm going to quote from it directly what intelligence services in places like the Netherlands, NATO members, are saying about Iran and the possibility Iran could test the bomb. And at the same time that came out, it was very interesting, folks. It was almost dueling stories. You have the deal between the Biden administration and Iran. You've got this story that we're going to focus on today, Iran, a nuclear test. By the way, I don't think they'll get to that point to actually conduct a nuclear test. I believe Israel would take action before that happens, but I'll expand on that. I'm going to get your thoughts as well. Right now, why don't you guys weigh in, guys and gals? We are going with our Q&A session, of course, at the end of this live stream. So why don't you weigh in right now? Do you believe Iran, and I'm not saying tomorrow, it could be a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, do you believe Iran will get to the point where it actually conducts a nuclear test where you wake up one morning and the headlines are everywhere on the news? Wow, Iran just conducted a nuclear test. Or do you believe that Israel would strike Iran's nuclear facilities, a military strike against Iran's nuclear installations, before Iran could even get to that point. If Israeli intelligence got wind of this, that look, they're close and they're so close that they may actually test a bomb, would Israel act before Iran even had the chance to conduct a nuclear weapons test? Let me know what you think there. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and we'll talk about it in the Q&A as well. But before we break all of this down, and we want to quote directly from what European intelligence services are saying, one last thing to mention. I mentioned dueling reports. Okay, we had the deal between Biden administration and Iran, prisoner release, 7 billion potentially released to the mullahs. We've got this story we're about to break down. And also at the same time, there were reports, and I don't think, folks, that this is any coincidence, that Iran is suddenly not freezing their uranium enrichment, but essentially they've slowed down a bit. They've slowed down. They were full throttle marching towards the bomb. Maybe they've pulled back, according to U.S. intelligence services, for what it's worth. They've pulled back a little bit, this report said last Friday, and they're not perhaps enriching as much uranium right now, because remember, they were rapidly, folks, nearing the threshold, I believe, and even the UN, which is not exactly hawkish on Iran, said a few months ago that Iran was at the point where it was enriching uranium at an 84% clip. Now, not to get too in the weeds about it, just know this. Once you get to a point where you are enriching uranium at a 90% military grade clip, then you have the capability to build nuclear weapons. Iran's at 84. You need to be at 90. So they're a hop, skip, and a jump away from developing nuclear weapons. And various intelligence services around the world say, yeah, you know what? They have enough enriched uranium right now for at least 2 bombs. But they have not made the choice yet to actually break out and develop the bombs. And I must correct them. They certainly have made the choice to develop nuclear weapons. No doubt about it. They know exactly what they want. They just haven't chosen their timing yet. They're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting for an opportune moment. Folks, look, if anything, number one, many believe the game of chess was invented in ancient Persia, which is modern day Iran. If nothing else, the leadership in Iran, this regime, is very patient. They're playing the long game. This Iran nuclear crisis, some have described it as the Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. We've been having this discussion now about Iran driving for the bomb, I don't know, 25 years, maybe a little less, but it really intensified around 2003, 2004. Wow, this is a big conversation. For at least the past 20 years, the Iran nuclear crisis has been a crisis for 2 decades. Cuban Missile Crisis, not even 2 weeks. This, 2 decades. So the Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion, I think that's a very apt description of where we're at with Iran's nuclear program. What I'm saying to you is this. Okay, perhaps they're not saying we're going to break out next week. And maybe not even we're going to break out and develop the bomb and test it next month or next year. But eventually we are. That's the bottom line. Well, they haven't made a choice yet. The end game for Iran, folks, make no mistake about it. The end game concludes with Iran in possession of nuclear weapons. No doubt. And they've been gradually and steadily building towards that point. Hey, not only have they shown patience, they've shown a grand plan and a grand strategy, and they're master tacticians, as evil and wicked as they are when it comes to this. When it comes to hoodwinking the West and taking the measure of their enemies. They have taken the measure of the West, the U.S. under its current leadership, Britain, France, Germany, etc., and they have concluded that the West is weak, naive in many cases, and desperate for a deal and filled with appeasers at the leadership level. I'm sorry to say it may sound harsh, but Iran, I believe, sadly, has rightly concluded that there is not much will among Western leaders to confront Iran in any sort of serious way over its nuclear program. So Iran has taken that measure, and they've said, okay, what we will do is we will milk them for all they can give us. They clearly are not going to take, they meaning the West, they're clearly not going to take military action against us. That's the calculus of Iran's leaders. They clearly are desperate to basically appease us. And what Western leaders are saying to us essentially is, please, we'll give you anything you want, billions of dollars. Please, pretty please, just be nice and don't build nuclear weapons and try not to start a war in the Middle East. If you do, we'll give you whatever you want. Iran sees that. And the Iranian regime, which should have no leverage whatsoever in this situation, has all the leverage somehow over the United States. Don't ask me how, because on paper they have none, and yet they're acting and they're flexing like they have all the leverage. And the U.S. is the junior partner in these negotiations. Why? Because the U.S. under this administration and under the Obama administration, when that initial Iran nuclear deal was cut back in 2015, has projected weakness and submission to the Iranian regime in negotiations. So, of course, Iran is confident and puffing out Iran's leaders are confident and puffing out their chest and Iran's nuclear negotiators, to the point where we've covered this a bunch in recent weeks. Look, the U.S. in recent weeks has sent F-16 fighter jets, F-35 fighter jets, at least 3 U.S. destroyers back to the Persian Gulf, back to the waters of the Middle East, including up to 3,000 U.S. Marines, all back, or Marines and sailors together, U.S. soldiers, I should say, all heading back to the Middle East as a message to Iran. To the main thing is they want to deter Iranian piracy on the high seas, as we have documented many times here on the Watchman News channel. Look, Iran has taken great delight in hijacking oil tankers, commercial vessels, etc., in particular this year, but many times over the past few years. It's nothing short of piracy by the Iranian regime, courtesy of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. So the U.S. says we're going to send a message. Hey, by the way, another big story, some 3,000 U.S. troops heading back to the Middle East. It's a big story. Mainstream media, crickets chirping. You're not hearing about it, but that's why we do what we do here in the Watchman News channel. And that is why you're here. And that is why we encourage you, if you have not subscribed, please click that subscribe button so you can join us every single day. Click notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted right here on the channel. Folks, you don't want to miss a single update. And I'm not exaggerating, because things are happening at such a rapid clip in the world's most chaotic and volatile region, the Middle East, that it's hard for even me to keep track sometimes. And I live and breathe this stuff. So be sure to subscribe. Also, hey, we've got a goal. We'd love to reach 700,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. Right now, we're about 26,000 short. We're at 674,000 subscribers. We, as a team, we set goals. We'd love to hit 700K, not for our glory or our own edification, but because we want to take this message far and wide to as many people as possible in these prophetic Bible times in which we are living in right now. We truly, truly appreciate when you join us as a subscriber. It's absolutely free. You can take it to another level if you click join and be a premium member as well. That's great. But the subscribe button will suffice for sure. And you can join us here every single day and help build this movement of watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. The goal to have more subscribers is not, wow, look at us, we have a bunch of subscribers. No, the goal is the more subscribers you have, the more views you have, the more YouTube will recommend it to people around the world who need to hear this message. Folks, this is a cause for me. This channel is by God and for God. Thank you to Mike Cohen, by the way, who just joined as a premium member. Mike, thank you for your kind words. I just saw it down the side of the screen here. God bless, Mike. Great to have you on board, my friend. Thank you. But folks, hey, I could have years ago probably gone into secular media. Not probably, I could have, to a secular media company, and I would have never, ever been able to talk about God or the Bible at all and tie it together into current events. But I chose not to do that. This is the path I chose, that God chose for me, I should say. I just obeyed and followed his lead. And I'm so glad I did, because I can speak freely in these Bible times in which we are living right now. You know, you can't really make sense of all of this And look, we come to it from a hard-hitting perspective. You can see the kind of reports we do on the Watchman on any Fox News, any place. But we have that extra added value of having a biblical perspective. And I believe, I don't know what you think, but I think you're probably in line with me on this, that you can't really big picture make sense of everything that's going on in the world right now without referring back to the Bible and to what the Word of God says. And what the Word of God says is coming and is already here. We live in prophetic times, no doubt. So I hope that that sets us apart a bit, and that's why you're going to be here with us on a regular basis as subscribers. We would love to have you. Okay, I want to quote directly from this piece from the J Post, the good old J Post, Jerusalem Post, been around for a long time and always with some great reporting. Folks, here's the headline. Now tell me what you think. This was published on Friday, August 11th. I wanted right away, I was going to post about it, but I said, you know what? Let's wait until the live stream on Wednesday so we can really unpack this together as the watchmen and women on the wall, you and I. But what do you think of this title from the J Post? Iran is close to testing nuclear weapons for the first time, according to European intelligence. I mean, I don't know. As my esteemed journalistic broadcaster colleague Ron Burgundy once said in Anchorman, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, in all seriousness, Iran close to testing nuclear weapons for the first time. And it wasn't just some fringe person saying this. European intelligence services are saying this. Yet I didn't hear a blip about this in the mainstream media on Friday or over the weekend. But I digress. That's why we're here doing what we do. Mainstream media, good luck with it. We'll do our thing, and we'll bring you these kind of cutting-edge stories that you're not hearing anywhere else that matter to you. Let's dig into it. Iran's fast-moving, I'm just quoting directly from my phone here, that's why I'm looking down. Iran's fast-moving development of weapons-grade uranium is bringing the possibility of an Iranian first nuclear test closer. The Islamic Republic of Iran is close to possibly testing a nuclear weapons device and has sought to obtain illicit technology, you don't say, for its active atomic weapons program, according to a series of shocking European intelligence reports released in 2023. Why haven't we heard about this? Okay, the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI for short, by the way, another great organization, MEMRI, they do incredible work. They first published translations of these European intelligence documents on their website. The Jerusalem Post then became the first Israeli newspaper to report on it. These are intelligence findings from the Netherlands, Sweden, and Germany. These are not secondary players. These are Western European nations closely aligned with the United States and Israel. The piece goes on to say the most unsettling revelation from the batch of intelligence data comes from the Netherlands General and Intelligence Security Service, AVID, that's their intelligence service, their version of the CIA, if you're an American. Get this. The AVID, Netherlands Security Service, determined that the Iranian regime's fast-moving development of weapons-grade uranium, we mentioned it a minute ago, right, 84%, you need 90, quote, brings the option of a possible Iranian first nuclear test closer. It's not me saying it. It's not Joe Schmo on the street saying it. This is the intelligence service of the Netherlands, a NATO member. I don't know. I think that's pretty relevant and a pretty credible voice on this. According to the Dutch intelligence report, last year, Iran proceeded with its nuclear program. The country continues to increase stocks of 20 and now 60% enriched uranium. Further enrichment, they will get to that 90% number, okay. Iran is further, here's a key point, Iran is further ignoring the agreements that were made within the framework of the JCPOA, another name for the Iran nuclear deal. They're enlarging their enrichment capacity. Wow. Now, mainly these European reports are covering Iran's illicit conduct in 2022, but the reports come out in 23. But I imagine, call me crazy, that Iran hasn't changed its behavior too much in the past few months since the calendar turned to 2023. Jimmy Brockington, welcome to the Watchman membership. God bless, Jimmy. Great to have you on board. Just saw that there as well. Then Sweden and Germany with similar intelligence reports sounding the alarm here. That look, they're getting to the point, the Iranian regime, where they could test a nuclear bomb. They have enough enriched uranium for two. Look, there's much that goes into it. I know. Who are they getting help from? Here's another question, folks, that could be, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, that could be an entire newscast, an entire episode of the Watchman Show on TBN, an entire special report. And we do that kind of investigative work here. We love doing it on the newscast. Who's helping them? We've seen Iranian scientists in North Korea. Iran and China just signed an agreement, either 20 or 25-year agreement last summer. Cooperation agreement where Iran's going to supply China, the communist regime in Beijing, with cheap oil and gas, and China in return, I'm sure, will arm the Iranian regime and then give them some advanced weaponry out of the kindness of their hearts. And then Russia. Now, we've talked about this many times. And again, this is the Gathering Storm Coalition. That's what we've called them here in the Watchman. I actually produced an entire special for TBN last year called The Gathering Storm. It focused on the threats by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and how those four forces are cleaving closer together in an anti-Western, and in the case of Iran and North Korea, certainly an anti-Israel coalition, and Russia becoming increasingly anti-Israel, and China, always a wild card, maintaining good relations with Israel. At the same time, it cuts a deal with Israel's greatest enemy, the Iranian regime. So we call it the Gathering Storm Coalition. It is indeed a coalition of nations standing against the West, standing against Israel, no doubt. So is this Gathering Storm Coalition in a position and willing, that's the key point, to assist the Iranian regime with nuclear technology, to help Iran cross the nuclear finish line? Would they do that? What do you think? Would they do that? Now, on paper, with North Korea, I'd say absolutely they would do it. North Korea, I mean, no hesitation there at all. They wouldn't have any fear of repercussions from Iran, anything like that. Iran turning the bomb on them, that's not North Korea's calculus. Iranian scientists have been present for North Korean nuclear tests, folks, just so you know. Would China supply Iran with nuclear know-how? A bit more interesting question there. Would China supply a radical Islamic nation? Yes, Iran, not the Iranian people, key distinction. They're the main victims of this regime, folks. When we talk about Iran, we're talking about that regime, that tyrannical, wicked regime, which has, first and foremost, oppressed its own people since 1979. The Iranian people are the main victims. That's why thousands upon thousands of Iranians were in the streets last fall and winter, and many times over the past decade plus, we have seen Iranians in the street, just the average Iranians, saying enough of this evil regime that's keeping us down and oppressing us. So just to get that out of the way. But a radical Islamic regime, China's been very careful in that regard. And Iran is not a long distance from China geographically. It's not right. It's not in China's backyard per se, but it's close enough where if a regime in Iran had the bomb, who knows where they'd launch it? China is not although they may be aligned with Iran, this Gathering Storm Coalition, one of the interesting things about it, folks, yes, they're aligned, but North Korea, Stalinist, atheist, communist regime. China, communist, atheist regime. Russia, no longer communist, just a rogue regime under Putin. And Iran, a radical Islamic regime. So ideologically, all over the map a little bit, but they share common interest against the West and increasingly against Israel. So there you have, if you're scratching your head and saying, why would they work together? So China, I think, would be careful in sharing nuclear know-how with Iran. Russia is the big question to me. North Korea would do it absolutely, and they already have, I'm sure, and ballistic missile technology as well. I'm sure that China has shared ballistic missile technology with Iran. I'm fairly certain they would do that. But would they go the extra mile of saying, hey, here's how you can cross the finish line and develop a nuclear weapon? If you're China, I would think you're saying, well, what if they eventually turn those weapons on us? If you're Russia, now, folks, 2 years ago, I would say Russia and Iran, they're coming together prophetically. I believe prophecy demands that they come together, and they certainly are. I believe that Gog, Magog invasion force will be led by Russia and Iran, that war of Gog and Magog that the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, lays out. Funny name, I know, but you should know it as well. And if you don't know it, go back and take a look at Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 and this latter days invasion force that comes against Israel. The good news is, I'll give away the ending, they perish on the mountains of Israel. They don't get very far. The God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has something to say about it, and then some. But nonetheless, that prophecy to me demands that, yes, what we're seeing right now is not a coincidence, folks, that Iran and Russia and Turkey as well are coming closer together. Traditionally rivals, they fought wars against each other historically in centuries past. But now at this precise moment in history, Iran and Russia and Turkey are all coming together, and their leaders are meeting on a fairly regular basis, and it looks very cozy when they're together. But the big question, okay, 2 years ago, I would say Russia won't go that far with Iran. Russia will not supply Iran with nuclear technology because Iran is at Russia's southern doorstep. Russia has had so many struggles over the years with radical Islamists. Chechen terrorists, Al-Qaeda, etc. Russia has been hit hard. 2 wars against Chechen separatists, and the second Chechen war was more of a jihadi war against Russia for sure. So Russia has been burnt badly over the years by Islamic jihadists. To me, I see the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people, but this regime as Islamic jihadists, because they are. They talk about waging jihad and martyrdom, etc. on a regular basis. Where I think Russia is making a crucial mistake is that they seem to see Iran as different than the Sunni jihadis like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, etc. Now, yes, they are different. There are theological differences. Iran, obviously, not to get too in the weeds here, but follow me. This is important. Iran, Shia jihadist. Iran, Hezbollah. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Sunni. There's theological differences there. Now, Shia and Sunni jihadis will work together against common foes. Hamas is Sunni, Iran is Shia, yet Iran is one of Hamas's top sponsors. So you get my drift. When it comes to killing Jews and killing Americans, they get along just fine. The Shia and Sunni jihadis. But Russia seems to see Iran as kind of a different beast. Look, in my view, while yes, there are theological differences, no doubt, between the Iranian regime's jihadis and the jihadis of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and they have fought each other in Syria and elsewhere, while at the same time, Al-Qaeda and Iran have worked together as well. What a tangled web, right, over the years. At the end of the day, and they're different tactics for sure, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and their ilk, they want it all now. They want the caliphate now. They want to kill you now. Where Iran, as we discussed earlier, plays the patient long game. At the end of the day, folks, they really are two sides of the same coin. They both want the same thing. Yeah, there are definitely theological differences ultimately of what it would all look like. The Iranian regime believes the Mahdi is coming back. He's going to lead the Islamic Messiah. The Mahdi is going to lead the Iran-led forces of Islam to victory over Israel, etc., world domination. The likes of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, they want the Islamic Caliphate, that they would rule over their own conception of it. So the conceptions are different, certainly between the Iranian regime and the Sunni jihadi world. And the tactics are certainly different. Iran's playing the long game. We know that. But when you boil it down to its barest essence, the end game is the same. Global domination by radical Islamic forces. and the destruction of Israel, the West, etc. Now, Russia would fall under the category of infidel in the eyes of the Iranian regime. Ultimately, look, there's no love lost for the for Russia, courtesy of the Iranian regime. The Ayatollah Khomeini, the godfather, if you call him that, of this wicked Iranian regime, was not a fan of the Soviet Union, the atheistic, communistic Soviet Union. And although Russia is not now a communist nation, and the Soviet Union is broken apart, at the end of the day, even Venezuela, these other Iranian allies, they are allies of convenience for the Iranian regime. There's not an ideological kinship there. Look, at the end of the day, the main driving force behind the Iranian regime is Islamic jihadism. It's an Islamic radical apocalyptic worldview. Russia doesn't share that. Venezuela doesn't share that. China doesn't share that. North Korea doesn't share that. They share radical views, apocalyptic in their own right, but not the Iranian regime's variety of radical Islamic eschatology that drives them. So remember, these are marriages of convenience for the Iranian regime. But when the rubber hit the road and there was a day where they could impress upon or make their dream of a worldwide Islamic empire with Iran at the head of it reign supreme, they would cast Russia, China, Venezuela aside in a heartbeat if they could. But they can't. They need these forces. They need these alliances. They need this backing. Which brings me back to Russia. Russia now has become reliant, in a sense, on the Iranian regime. I never thought I'd say that 2 years ago, even before the Ukraine invasion. But look, Russia has expended a lot of blood and treasure in Ukraine, no doubt. And they have really looked to Iran to fill the void in terms of, number one, those drones, those suicide drones, kamikaze drones, whatever you want to call them. Iran has supplied them in mass quantities to Russia, and Russia has used those to great and deadly effect in Ukraine, to the point where Russia is now, as we have reported here in the newscast, going to open a drone factory east of Moscow where they will roll these off the assembly line. Russia has also reportedly asked at least Iran about ballistic missiles and other forms of assistance that Iran is sending to Russia to replenish Russian weaponry for the war in Ukraine. And look, Iran has stood with Russia on the world stage. Many after the Ukraine invasion was launched, obviously Russia became a pariah, but not to Iran and Syria and China, Venezuela, and others. So Russia is saying, look, what friends we do have left and allies, we got to cultivate that. We're going to cultivate that. So Russia seeing Iran as a loyal friend and ally, number one. Number two, seeing Iran as a source of much needed weaponry raises the question. No longer is Russia clearly, I mean, before, folks, Iran was the junior partner by miles and Russia the senior partner in that relationship. The playing field has been leveled a bit more since the Ukraine invasion, where Russia is saying, you know, we actually need these mullahs in Tehran. So now, with that as the calculus, could Russia potentially, and look, Iran is not supplying Russia with these advanced weapons out of the goodness of their hearts, the Iranian regime. They expect something in return, a quid pro quo. So what will Russia do in return? Now, Russia is supplying Iran with fighter jets. Iran's air force is from the 1960s and 70s, by the way. So Russia reportedly is in the process of supplying more advanced Air Force fighter jets. But two things I've thought about in terms of the quid pro quo and what Russia will give in return to the Iranian regime. Number one, would it be some nuclear know-how and assistance with Iran's nuclear program? I don't believe at this stage it's outside the realm of possibility, folks. And if you are the Iranian regime, you're saying, hey, we're really helping you guys out. What will you do for us? And number two, Israel. and this is what I believe, and someone in our comments just mentioned the chat, the hook in the jaw, Ezekiel 38 and 39. You have to believe that Iran has been pestering Russia for sure over the past several years and saying, hey, you are allowing Israel to embarrass us in Syria. Hundreds of Israeli airstrikes, right, over the past several years against Iran, Hezbollah, and their various allies in Syria, under the watchful noses of Russia, which essentially controls the skies over Syria. Thousands of Russian soldiers still in Syria. And what's ultimately what Russia says goes in that country. Russia closely aligned with Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, shoulder to shoulder with them on the battlefields there over the years. And yet Russia has stood aside and allowed Israel freedom of movement and operation in Syria to strike Iran on a consistent basis. So if you're Iran, you're saying to Russia, what gives? Hey, we're helping you. I thought we were friends and allies, yet you're allowing Israel to punch us in the nose constantly and weaken us militarily. So as part of this quid pro quo, is Iran pestering Russia perhaps and saying, hey, in return for the help we are graciously giving you, Vladimir, would you be so kind as to close the skies over Syria and tell Israel no more airstrikes? That is over. Essentially a no-fly zone for Israeli fighter jets over Syria. Folks, you have to believe that Iran has broached that subject with the regime in Moscow over the past several years, especially in the past year and a half or so, as Iran has been upping all its assistance to Russia and standing solidly behind Russia and beside Russia on the world stage. What do you think? I think it's a very interesting question. Would Russia give Iran nuclear assistance? I rewind. I keep telling you, hey, 2 years ago I would have said no. Why? Because Russia has had so much trouble with Islamic jihadists that you would think that Russia would say, we're not helping Islamic jihadists go nuclear. And that's what they would be doing with Iran. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, does Vladimir Putin, do the Russian brass, do they see Iran as a different beast from Al-Qaeda and ISIS? I think that is the big question here. And if they do, they're sadly mistaken, because Iran, yes, there's differences as I outlined a bit, but at the end of the day, the end game is the same. Iran wants the same things, essentially, that Al-Qaeda and ISIS want, despite the Shia-Sunni divide, the tactical differences, the timetable, all of it. It all ends up in the same place. They want the same thing. And I believe it's very, very short-sighted for Vladimir Putin and his regime to get in bed with the Iranian regime, considering that fact. You can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And the company Vladimir Putin keeps is the Ayatollahs in Tehran, the communist regime in Beijing, and the regime in North Korea, among others. You do the math. Some people won't like that, but that's my view. And here on the Watchman Newscast, we don't believe these are times to mince words. And we're going to tell it like it is. And if we didn't agree or disagree, it's still a free country here in the United States, where I live at least. Agree or disagree, I think you'd appreciate someone who at least speaks from the heart, speaks from conviction, and tells it like it is, the best he knows how, and the best he's led by the Holy Spirit. So we'll continue to do that here on the show. Hey, we're getting a question shortly, and I want to mention this coming together that I teased at the top of Palestinian terror groups under the Iranian umbrella, of course, in Judea and Samaria, a.k.a. the West Bank. I want to mention that, but a quick mention. A few people have commented, hey, I like your shirt. The Watchman with Erick Stakelbeck merch, I guess you would call it, my kids would call it, is now here by popular demand. Just wanted to mention people for years, hey, T-shirts, hoodies, hats, mugs, where are they? We want some Watchman swag. So our team has launched a Watchman store, shop.tbn.org/Watchman. You see the URL. I think Daniel will throw it up. Shop.tbn.org/Watchman to get some cool Watchman gear, T-shirts, hats, mugs, hoodies, and show your support for the channel. Kind of fly the Watchman colors there. We think it's kind of cool. And hey, My 12-year-old, my 16-year-old said, Dad, we like your merch. It's cool. So it got their seal of approval, so I know it looks good. But in all seriousness, a way to support the channel and keep us going. Unfortunately, to have a very large channel here, almost 700,000 subscribers, a weekly TV show on TBN, it's not free, sadly. So any kind of support is always most welcome and greatly appreciated. And hey, the shirt looks pretty cool, just in time for the summertime. Okay, we want to get to the questions, but I want to mention this activity. I think this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. I have mentioned Judea and Samaria as, quote, the next front. Now, we've talked many times about this ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides, whether it's, you can probably recite it at this point right now, right? If you watch this newscast on a regular basis, whether it's Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to the south in Gaza, Hezbollah to the north in southern Lebanon, further south the Houthis in Yemen, those various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria to the north, to the east. Israel is virtually surrounded on all sides by radical forces. I call it the Iranian-backed ring of fire, which wishes to eliminate the world's one and only Jewish state. Now, the West Bank, also known as, let's say Judea and Samaria, also known as, in the eyes of the world, as the West Bank. That has been a long coveted front for Iran and its proxies over the years. And in recent months, as we have laid out for you here in the newscast, Jenin and Nablus in particular in Samaria have really become hotbeds of activity for, in particular, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but also Hamas. And they are exporting their terror tactics and attempting to export their terror infrastructure from their Gaza home base into the West Bank. And that's troubling. We've seen a big uptick in terror activity there, for sure. So let us quote, once again, from the trusty Jerusalem Post. We quoted from the J Post earlier as well. I stand corrected. Times of Israel, we're quoting from. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, reads the headline, seen as importing Gaza military tactics to the West Bank. A new analysis published again by MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, highlights the various indications pointing at a new military infrastructure emerging in the Jenin and Nablus areas, resembling what already exists in the coastal enclave of Gaza ruled by Hamas. And they have a joint war room, do Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Gaza, and they're trying to transport that to the West Bank. Manufacturing of weapons and advanced explosive devices, excavating terror tunnels, launching rockets, and fostering cooperation among different terror organizations. The main actors, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they enjoy significant financial and military support from Iran, and they and Iran frequently have talked publicly about turning the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, into a new terror front. And a main reason for this happening, folks, is the times we're living in. Iran wants to close the circle. They want to close that ring of fire around Israel on all sides, and Judea and Samaria would enable them to do that to an even greater degree. But also the weakening of the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas, which the West, the United States, have always been so eager to prop up as Israel's supposed partner for peace. At the same time, Mahmoud Abbas is cheerleading acts of terror against Israelis and paying the salaries of terrorists who murder Israelis. We've called it pay for slay, and others have called it that as well here on the Watchman. But I digress. Mahmoud Abbas is up there in years. Wow, I think he's in his late 80s now, early 90s. Don't quote me on that. He's old. I don't have the age in front of me, but someone, if you want to look it up, shoot the age. He's up there in years, very advanced in years. He's seen as a weak leader and a figurehead. And look, Iran smells blood, and the proxies smell blood in the West Bank. Palestinian Authority governs the West Bank right now, much of Judea and Samaria, at least the Palestinian areas there. But Hamas and Islamic Jihad are saying, a day may come where they don't. Israel wants to prevent that. They cannot have Judea and Samaria turning into Gaza Part 2. So Israel's very mindful of this. That's why Israel has gritted its teeth and held its nose and worked with the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria over the years, with Western pressure, of course, to do so as well. But Hamas and Islamic Jihad see a day where they will reign supreme and really stir things up in Judea and Samaria and create a new front against Israel where, look, in Judea and Samaria, you're amid the population. It's not like Gaza, where Gaza is this enclave, this coastal enclave, which after 2005, all Israelis evacuated in the Gaza withdrawal. And it's strictly a Palestinian enclave right now, shut off from Israel proper. Judea and Samaria is a different story, where you have Jewish communities side by side with Arab communities there. And it makes it much easier for Palestinian communities there to attack Jewish Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Iran knows this very well. So we're keeping an eye on that. And we know that Israel's intelligence services are keeping an eye on it as well. It's a great concern, especially in this coming Great Northern War that I believe is, folks, approaching for sure. What will happen in Judea and Samaria? Will Palestinian areas there ignite at the behest and the prodding of Hamas and Islamic Jihad? We may see soon. Okay, let's get to your questions. And they're always good, and there's always a bunch. And I'm always pulling my hair out because they're always so good. I'm like, I didn't get to that one, that one, that one. Let's see. I got to give you guys your props. We have such an educated, informed audience here in the Watchman. It is an absolute pleasure and a joy, and I'm not blowing smoke. It truly is to share these live streams with you every week and have the give and take your questions, because I'm not getting any throwaway crazy questions. These are good. These are solid. This is a smart, well-informed audience, and a Holy Spirit-led audience too, which seals the deal and makes it much, much better, to say the least. But loving it here. Let's see. Okay. What do we have? What do we have? There's many questions here. I'm trying to kind of sift through. Wow, some interesting scenarios here about Damascus. Oh my gosh, what a great question here by Sean Gephardt. Wow, Sean, some good outside the box thinking. Do you think that the Hezbollah tent is possibly covering a Hezbollah tunnel? Wow, Sean, great question. Just to refresh all of your memories, we've been talking a bunch about the Hezbollah-Israel tensions along that Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah erected two military tents manned by Hezbollah operatives on the Israeli side of the border, on Israeli soil, inside Israeli territory. Talk about feeling emboldened if you're Hezbollah. Now, they apparently took down one of the tents, but one, I believe, is still standing. And they essentially were refusing to take it down, and they were daring Israel to act against it. Now, Sean, what are they doing? Why set up these tents? And could the tents be above something they're digging below? I would say a few things. Number one, certainly the intent and the track record is there. Hezbollah has dug several tunnels along that Israel-Lebanon border. I've been in the tunnels. If you've seen the Watchmen, I've gone in there with the Israel Defense Forces. I've actually been in Hezbollah terror tunnels. Wow. And that's an experience I'll never forget. You feel like you're walking down into the bowels of hell. But Israel thankfully uncovered about 6 tunnels, I believe, that we know of. God forbid that there's more, but that we know of, 6. So clearly Hezbollah spent a lot of time and treasure in digging those tunnels that the IDF uncovered back in 2018. Is there the intent to dig more tunnels? No doubt. Yes. And we know that because Hezbollah talks frequently, and we just laid this out on the newscast earlier this week. And by the way, if you missed any of our newscasts, they're in the archives. Every single newscast right here under newscast on the homepage, and subscribe when you're there, of course. But Hezbollah has talked about invading the Galilee, northern Israel. Certainly terror tunnels would help them to do that. So now they set up these tents. What's inside the tent? Is there some digging going on? Sean, anything's possible, and that would be a pretty slick maneuver by Hezbollah. But I would certainly think if that was going on, I just love the question. I love how you're thinking, Sean, outside the box. I would think that the Israel Defense Forces, Israeli intelligence would have a beat on that and would be aware. I would think it would be loud, number one, unless it's a Shawshank Redemption type deal, and they're going to take 20 years to chip away overnight in the dead of night. If you know Shawshank Redemption, great flick, you know what I'm talking about. But so I would doubt they're digging a tunnel under that tent, just because Israel, I think, would know. But Sean, interesting thinking, my friend, and an interesting question you bring up. Anything's possible. I'd never say never, God forbid. Let's see. Denver Johnson, premium member, thanks, Denver, asks, do you think Russia is actually using Iran as a scapegoat, just like Putin used Chechen and Syrian fighters in the war against Ukraine? You could say that, Denver. Look, just as I said a minute ago, the Iranian regime has no love lost for Russia, the Russian infidels who are non-Islamic. By the same token, Denver, you bring up a great point. Russia has, at the end of the day, folks, no love lost for the Iranian regime or the Iranian people or Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards, for that matter. None. Again, it's a marriage of convenience for both of these forces. And yes, Russia would be more than willing to throw Iranian fighters to the wolves in advance of Russia's goals, just as they did with Chechen and Syrian fighters. It's cannon fodder for them, no doubt. Sad to say, even the average young Russian seems to be cannon fodder for Vladimir Putin's regime. But you make a great point about Iran. And look, don't get it twisted. There's no deep brotherly love between Russia and Iran on either side when the rubber hits the road. But they will come together in common cause. And I do believe it will come together as laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, in what Ezekiel calls the latter days. Okay. Colby Lewis has a good question. Okay, two. Wow. Good questions. Colby Lewis asks, what do you see happening if Saudi Arabia and Israel strike a deal? Good question, Colby. Will this lead, he asks, to a Palestinian state in Israel? Colby, again, great question. I would never say never. I would say never. No, I wouldn't. I would say under the current Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, it would be extremely, highly unlikely that we would see a Palestinian state established. His government would collapse, number one, unless he did it without the knowledge of his cabinet members. I don't see a way that could happen. With the current right-wing government, the way it's constructed, Bibi's government would collapse. His coalition partners would say, no way, we're out. This is a betrayal of everything we've discussed and the government we formed, we're out of here. And Bibi knows that. He would lose his coalition unless Bibi is a master politician and political operator. Is there a way that Bibi, and it seems improbable, Lapid and Gantz, they're mortal enemies with Benjamin Netanyahu right now, it seems. Lapid more than Gantz. Does Bibi reassemble his coalition? Does he call new elections? Does he, and this seems completely improbable and unlikely right now, but two things, in Israel and Israeli politics, anything can happen. And in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected, left turns, right turns, everything, U-turns, I should say, curves, twists and turns. Could Bibi disband the current government and say, I'm sick of dealing with these guys, we're calling new elections? And could he, to the shock of the world, form a coalition with someone like a Benny Gantz? Again, it seems completely unlikely, folks. It seems pie in the sky, ain't going to happen. But if something like that in these crazy, topsy-turvy, unpredictable days in which we live did somehow happen, perhaps you could see a Palestinian state for certain as part of that Israeli-Saudi peace deal. Now, if you had a new Israeli government led by Yair Lapid, for sure, and probably Benny Gantz, I think absolutely a Palestinian state would be a big part of the Israeli-Saudi peace deal. But the interesting thing about it is that the Saudis are not stressing that. Thankfully, they're not because look, the Palestinians right now, is this Palestinian state going to encompass Hamas-ruled, Iran-ruled Gaza? What about Judea, Samaria, which we just talked about, which is kind of a mess right now in the Palestinian areas? Mahmoud Abbas, up in years and then some, chaotic there. Is this really the right time to try and establish and cobble together some sort of Palestinian state, which could very well wind up being a terror entity that Iran moves in on and takes advantage of? I don't think so, to say the least. But nonetheless, the Biden administration is really pushing this, and the West. They, folks, are pushing a Palestinian state more than the Saudis are, and more than the Muslim world is for the most part. Now, some Muslim leaders and the Jordanians certainly pay lip service to a Palestinian state. The king of Saudi Arabia does as well, although, as we see very clearly, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is really the voice and the power broker in Saudi Arabia these days. And he's not wringing his hands and gnashing his teeth and demanding a Palestinian state or everything's off the table. Certainly, the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco weren't either, because they signed peace accords with Israel without a Palestinian state. So did Egypt and Jordan, of course, years ago. But I'm talking Abraham Accords more recently. The UAE, Bahrain, which, look, have close relations with Saudi Arabia, obviously, and which both said, yeah, we have Saudi Arabia's blessings to sign these peace accords with Israel. They didn't demand a Palestinian state. And I don't think the Saudis would either. I think there's a good chance that they could, but I think there's a good chance they wouldn't. They may want other concessions. They're talking maybe nuclear reactors, advanced weaponry from the United States, etc., security guarantees. I think that is much more important to Saudi Arabia than a Palestinian state. Folks, the Iranian regime, the Iranian threat, the threat posed by Iran and Hezbollah, that Iranian axis and countering that is of greater concern to the Saudis than a Palestinian state. I promise you, no doubt. When Saudi and Israeli officials talk, the Saudis aren't hammering Palestinians left and right. They're talking Iran and Iran's nuclear program, and they're talking about the weakness in Washington, D.C. that is helping to make all these Iranian moves possible. So great question there by Colby. The Biden administration is hell-bent and obsessed with the Palestinian state. And they are saying to Israel, saying to Bibi, and they know the price of this would be Bibi's current coalition collapsing, but they're saying, hey, we can help you get to the finish line with a deal with the Saudis that Bibi has talked about so much. I interviewed him back in December, and he talked about it a bunch. He thinks it's one of the great things he'll accomplish as prime minister. It's close. Eli Cohen, the foreign minister, everyone's saying it's close. There may be even flights to Mecca from Israel by 2024, Eli Cohen, the foreign minister, said recently. So Biden knows Bibi wants this, a deal with Saudi Arabia. So the Biden administration is saying, hey, we'll be the mediator, we'll be the go-between, we'll help you get there, but Israel, you got to make a bunch of concessions, and foremost among them, not for the Saudis. That's the interesting, crazy thing, but for the Biden team and just various Western factions is a Palestinian state. Folks, pretty crazy. We live in times where common sense is not so common, but that is where we are in August 2023. Bible times, and we live in times where evil is called good and good is called evil, like the prophet Isaiah described. But hey, I'm thankful I'm here with you, walking through it all here with my watchmen and women on the wall every day here in the Watchman Newscast. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the live stream. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.